It was a hot day in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Baseball practice was in full swing. 16-year-old Jonathan Aldys had just run to second base when suddenly he collapsed. His father, Dennis, who was also his coach, stood just steps away.
I just glanced over towards shortstop for no apparent reason, was just looking around the bases, and I noticed Jonathan lying on the field there, motionless.
Spectators thought Jonathan had fainted from the heat. One of the players' moms, who was a nurse, walked over to check out the situation.
He's laying on the ground there, and she begins to do mouth-to-mouth, and she was instructing me in chest compressions.
Jonathan's heart had stopped beating. Many people, including his brothers, started praying.
My sons were there, kneeling there on the baseball field around him, just crying out to the Lord, Lord, heal Jonathan, and weeping and crying at the same time.
Dennis was also praying.
Bring him back, Lord, bring him back. So my heart was just devastated.
The paramedics arrived about 10 minutes into the ordeal.
The ambulance is there, and they're shocking him, and the first shock, and there's no response. The second shock, there's no response. So on the third shock, I think a heartbeat of about 30 beats per minute appears, and they instantly put him in the ambulance, and we're rushed to the hospital. And it was a 28-minute period of time there that he had no oxygen.
Jonathan's mother, Dara, met them at the emergency room.
I'm a mother of 7, so what was on the altar first was, will I be a mom of 6? You know, will I be the mom that son collapsed and died?
The doctors prepared Dennis and Dara for the worst.
28 minutes without breathing. There are no statistics past 20 minutes of CPR and an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. If you survive at the 20-minute mark, you're vegetable, you're sustained with life support, and you may or may not go home.
It was the next day after he was in the intensive care that a neurologist came by, and her story was actually, we'll believe that God can do something, but you need to know that he has very little chance at all to have a brain. It's basically impossible that someone could go this long without oxygen in their brain ever function.
Dennis and Dara run a prayer ministry called the International House of Prayer of Hattiesburg. On the ball field when Jonathan collapsed, at the hospital, and at the ministry headquarters, people across the city prayed around the clock for their son.
Every 3 hours we got to go into the ICU, and I anointed him with oil every time I went back there. And I was big enough I could have pretty much reached his body, and from his head to his toe I just prayed for him, Lord, life. We speak life into this boy's body, into our son's body.
Soon, they began seeing answers to their prayers.
After 30 hours of being unconscious, Jonathan woke up and he looked at us. At first, his eyes did not track us. He was just kind of glazed.
And so at that 40-hour mark was a time when we were back there and his eyes were open, and he actually focused on me, because I would go in and I would get directly over his face right there, and I would say, Jonathan, because as a father, I want him to know his dad's here. And so I finally said, Jonathan, if you hear me at all, smile at me or something. And he attempted a smile, and his mom and I just bawled, wept at the joy that Jonathan was in there.
Within days of the incident, Jonathan began to improve.
On day 3, they allowed him to try to walk in the ICU there, and so he got up, walked about 10 steps around in a circle, and came back down, and the doctors thought that was incredible.
By now, people all over the country were praying for Jonathan.
We were seeing him do things that the doctor said he couldn't do for months or years or maybe never.
By day 5, all the tubes were out, everything, he was totally unhooked and walked around the cardiac care unit, the CCU. And the doctors couldn't believe that on day 5, after such an event, that he was walking around.
On day 10, Jonathan went home.
I believe that Jonathan was not only spared the effects of not breathing for 28 minutes or not having a heartbeat, he was spared brain damage and organ damage. but he was healed of whatever caused it. So it's like two miracles because they could find absolutely nothing wrong with him.
Still, the doctors recommended that he should not play sports for a while.
In my life, I love sports. I love the competitiveness of sports and all.
Within 6 months, Jonathan returned to playing baseball and basketball.
Even the people that make it out of the hospital, some of those have neurological damage. They never quite the same after that. But to see Jonathan playing drums, driving down the road, it's just nothing short of miraculous.
The Aldys believe that God heard their prayers and healed their son.
Through this experience, my biggest things are the preciousness of life, obviously, the reality of a God who is in charge and does care.
The biggest lesson is, in my opinion, that God loves me, and that God cares for me, and that my friends and my family love me, and that my friends and family care for me.
But there are moments where my heart returns to the miracle and the gift that God gave us when he returned Jonathan back to us, and just overwhelming gratitude to the Lord. Just his goodness enveloping me. Prayer changes things.